Psychoanalysis and philosophy. Subject today is topic of psychological parasites. Psychological parasites is more of a colloquial term. It's not an academic concept or an academic term. It is used in a colloquial sense more than in a technical sense. However, there are takes on this term from various standpoints. There is a strict, rational, scientific, psychoanalytic, and psychotherapeutic take on this. And there is another take on this from the side of mysticism and spirituality. Our discussion today will navigate through the areas of conventional scientific discourse and the area of mysticism. Our discussion also is important from the standpoint of applied psychotherapy to help patients identify psychological parasites around them at present or as they were in the past, and the consequences thereof, and how to save themselves. Just as for the patients, it's important to save themselves from psychological parasites. At a personal level, it's equally important for us to save ourselves from psychological parasites we encounter either around us, in the family, or in the society we live in, our neighborhood, or our professional world, or the society at large. So it's a interesting discussion from psychological health standpoint, especially preventive, curative also, but more preventive, and even more important from standpoint of quality of life. With psychological parasites around, you cannot have a high quality of life. They are mutually exclusive. So to have a good quality of life, it's necessary to protect oneself from psychological parasites. In addition, of course, to many other factors. Only avoiding psychological parasites will not result in good quality of life, but it's an important contributor to ensuring good quality of life. Let us start with what a parasite is, especially our discussion of psychological parasite. The word parasite usually comes from biology. We see there are certain organisms who can't survive on their own. So they enter another organism or another cell and survive on the nourishment available in that cell. They not only survive, but they also multiply and grow, often at the cost of the host. So the parasite, in a way, devours, exploits, and destroys the host. There is also a relation of symbiosis, which is different from a parasitic relationship. In symbiosis, two organisms or two cells come together, and in some form of mutual exchange, they both benefit from the trade-off they do, where each does something for the other. It's almost a relationship of healthy dependence. In symbiosis, we talk about cooperation, versus in a parasitic relationship, we talk about exploitation, robbery, plunder, and devouring. Parasitic relationship essentially is a malevolent relationship. And parasites come in all colors and flavors. We started off the definition with the context of a biological parasite, but equally you will see economic parasites in society. You will see social parasites, and you also see psychological parasites. The biological parasites exploit, rob, plunder, devour nourishment from the host. Economic parasites are those individuals in society who are dependent on someone in a very exploitative way. We often see a lazy man in the family who does nothing and lives off the income of others who work hard. And this is an example of an economic parasite. There are very intelligent and cunning professionals in corporates who hollow out the corporates while they are there, building their own personal secret empire, and then they kick that organization and start something of their own, competing against the parent organization and using the knowledge and the relationships they have there and the weaknesses, they devour the parent organization. These are economic parasites. Social parasites are the serial dole seekers. So there is a group in every society that does nothing but lives on social security system. These are the social parasites. And then you have psychological parasites of all colors and flavors. They can't live without a host. The host can be a parent, it can be a wife, it can be a child, but the psychological parasite devours the host and lives off the host in a psychological sense. It may be a narcissist who is a parasite and who lives off a dependent, or it can be a antisocial personality who lives off somebody who is psychologically attached but is a noble person, or in certain cases it may be a psychological parasite who is a passive aggressive person who puts his aggression into others and lives off through others. So there are various types of psychological parasites, and if you are surrounded by one, you have had it. The quality of life, it's very difficult to protect being with a psychological parasite around you, either in the relationship situation or in the professional setup. And unfortunately, we are surrounded by psychological parasites across our lives in the personal and the professional sphere. It's very necessary to identify psychological parasites and build our protection against them. Cut off from them is if possible. If not, build protection from them. Let us look at the types of psychological parasites, how we can classify, how we can categorize different types of psychological parasites. First category, those who celebrate in the misfortune of others. Very high degree of narcissism, very high degree of envy, very high degree of destruction and sadism. They experience exhilaration, effervescence, excitement, a celebratory high when they see misfortune of others. They love to discuss it. They love to take the position of holier than thou. They love to criticize somebody's arrogance, real or imagined, but they love to celebrate in the misfortune of others. Second category, those who celebrate in devouring the other. If they earn money healthy way, they don't feel so happy. But if they can snatch it from somebody, they feel very happy. There is this extra kick of conquest and devouring the other. It's a very animalistic instinct converted at a human level into a strange kind of sadism and excitement. Second category, these psychological parasites, they celebrate in devouring the other. The first category you can see easily, those who celebrate in the misfortune of others. You can easily see the unsuccessful narcissistic group. The second category is those who misuse their power. They can be military generals, they can be policemen, they can be those jailers, they can be government officials, they can be politicians. They celebrate in devouring the other. Third category, living off others. This has a passive category and an active category. The passive category is the soft dependent types, and the active category is the narcissistic types. They don't overtly celebrate, but they silently and subtle way they operate. There is another category of psychological parasites who rejoice in reducing the quality of life of their hosts or people around them. When they reduce the quality of life of somebody, they feel very happy. Fifth category of parasites, psychological parasites, is the malevolent dependent ones. They depend not only financially but emotionally so much that they actually devour, exploit, and render completely dry and empty the exhausted other. And that is when an extra kick they experience. When they see the host completely devoured, exhausted, and empty. It's as though a very deep-seated envy is finally at rest, set to rest. The sixth category is a very subtle category. They are psychological parasites who use the host, which often is the therapist, or the parent, or an authority figure. At times, even a friend, lover, or a wife, or husband, or even grandparents. This category, they are very subtle psychological parasites. You can't make out they are being psychological parasites from their behavior. They operate at a more subtle level. And what they do is very malevolent projective identifications. They put very difficult parts of themselves into you when you are with them. And they use you to process or contain or hold their difficult parts which they don't want to deal with. If this happens early in childhood, you don't designate that as psychological parasite. But if it happens in the adult age and it happens repeatedly as a pattern, then you use this category to designate that group of individuals who are very subtle psychological parasites indulging in projective and malevolent indulging in malevolent projective identification. Another category is that which enjoys the destruction of the other. They get exhilaration from destruction of the other. And they don't wait for misfortune or in slow devouring. They do a rapid destruction of the other, and more often than not, they do it very secretly. It's a very secretive combination of narcissism, lack of impulse control, and antisocial traits. It's a very strange combination that you see in this category, where they relish in the destruction of others and they actively bring about the destruction of the other, often in a covert way, at times, rarely, but at times, even in an overt way. Malevolent dependence, we have done that. Should remove that. Helpless pathological dependence. This is slightly different from malevolent dependence. Malevolent dependence can involve narcissistic types, lazy types, incapable types, or the extremely pathological dependent types. In this helpless pathological dependence, this category, these are soft dependent types, soft hysterical types. The category that cannot separate. Also the unfortunate category where because of socio-economic conditions, they get into a situation of helplessness. And after some age, because of the age and the socio-economic condition, the helpless pathological dependence continues. There is also a gender aspect to it. Women from low-income communities are more likely to experience this. So this is one list of categories of psychological parasites. There is another category where socioeconomic dependence can train a person over time in this particular zone, and they appear to be psychological parasites, but they have got trained into it because of long duration of socioeconomic dependence. Another category is of covert narcissistic aggressive types. The covert passive aggressive narcissist. They are also psychological parasites who live off by projecting their aggression into others. This is one more category. Narcissistic exploitation we have done before. The mood spoilers. This category, they relish in spoiling mood because they can't manage their envy when they look at someone effervescent, or the effervescence can spike in them, activate in them disintegration anxiety or Oedipal anxiety, and they have to keep everything low key, everything non-effervescent, in order to prevent rise of disintegration anxiety, castration anxiety, Oedipal guilt, and envy. And they become mood spoilers, the cold blanket throwers. They won't allow you to be happy for long in their presence. They will throw a bucket of cold water on the warm, effervescent mood that you have. These are mood spoilers. And then you have effervescence, sorry, you can put them into two, mood spoilers and effervescent destroyers. Mood spoilers are those who will convert your mood from high to low. They can't endure high mood of others, just as effervescence destroyers can't endure effervescence of others. And in both cases, mood spoilers and effervescence destroyers, the motivation for doing what they do is related to envy, fear of disintegration anxiety, and the fear of Oedipal activation, which involves both castration anxiety, guilt, and sadness, all of which is blocked up in that Oedipal complex. It can also be long duration defeat deprivation leading to a bitterness of life. That also can make one a mood spoiler or an effervescence destroyer. It can also be training, that if the parents are not comfortable with positive mood or effervescence, the children get trained unknowingly to become mood spoilers or effervescence destroyers. One more category is that of revenge seekers. Often it happens that a person wants to seek revenge from X, but reality, morality not permitting, he displaces it onto Y. And they seek revenge from an otherwise innocent person. And in that process, they cross all lines. And they also are psychological parasites. They destroy and devour their object of attack. Psychological parasites come in all colors and flavors. Yes. Save thyself. Tragedies, we are surrounded by them in the personal and the professional sphere. And if we look at the human society, it's a psychologically sick society. Homo sapiens sick. Not to have a psychological pathology is an exception, not the rule. So it's a very part of the human condition that most of us face deprivation, difficult childhood, difficult working condition, difficult family conditions. And somehow or the other, many people develop into psychological parasites. They are more around us than we can export, and nobody is ready to import them. Some of them can be healed. For most of them, you just have to create a small world of yours and save yourselves from them. There are many ways of dealing with them. If situation is such that you can't deal with them in any way and you cannot endure them, then some defenses will have to be used to fool yourself, because that is the only sane way out, happy way out in that situation. But that is for very few. Most of us can avoid parasites or save ourselves by certain defenses. They can be anybody: father, mother, brother, son, teacher, colleague. How to deal with them? First is to recognize it. In most cases, the most difficult task is to recognize somebody as a psychological parasite. Do you feel uneasy in the presence of somebody? Do you feel somebody is exploiting you and it's not a fair bargain in the relationship? Do you feel something odd about somebody? Do you feel like avoiding somebody? If these are the constant feelings you have about somebody for a considerable period of time, it is good to talk about it to your friend or your therapist. And also then take a personal view on it. If or not, they are psychological parasites. The point is not to issue certificates, the point is to save oneself. How do you do it? First is to recognize, that's the most important point. And here, as I said, there are some criteria, reflect upon it and come to your own assessment. If you feel the assessment needs to be vetted by others, talk to your friends, relatives, colleagues, if necessary with a therapist. First is to recognize. Once you are clear that a person is a psychological parasite of some type, then try to talk to the person about what he is doing. If you talk of mild, moderate, and severe parasites, if he is mild type or mild to moderate type, you can talk him out of it. But if he is severe or moderate to severe type, it's very difficult to talk him out of. If talk does not work, learn to dismiss him. If necessary, even attack him. And if nothing works, separate from him. So it's the very good approach of talk, dismiss, attack, separate. In fact, if you live long enough and if you love yourself enough, this will happen naturally. This movement from talk to dismiss to attack to separate is a very natural movement that will occur to you. A counter intuitive argument can be, if you think in a contrary direction, you can put a question: is everyone then not a parasite? No. Healthy dependence is not being a parasite. Healthy dependence is healthy and it's mutually enriching. It is not a situation where one devours the other and leaves the other exhausted, empty, and unhappy. Second, to find an easy way out of the struggles and the risks of life. Most people at some point in their life would have had the temptation to take a parasitic position. But the temptation for most people is short term and not enduring. They may have experienced very short term micro episodes, but it's very different from having a stable characteristic and a natural pathological tendency. So everyone is not a parasite. We are looking at about 15%, 10 to 15% of population. Different societies may have a different percentage of it, but a 10 to 15% of society that we can classify as psychological parasites. Pathogenesis from a psychoanalytic standpoint, it is obviously a pathology, no doubt about it. It can come about from pathological dependence out of object loss in early childhood, or failed attempts at independence in childhood or growing up years, or somebody trained or hammered into dependence by dominating narcissistic parents, or a very long period of helplessness and powerlessness, often because of socioeconomic situations. All of this can create a very pathological situation where one takes the position of a psychological parasite. There can also be situations of antisocial personality, psychopathic personality. There can be an inertia addiction. It can be addiction only to inertia or addiction to the three I's: inertia, indolence, and indulgence. There can be intense fear of going out into the world, of being annihilated if one goes out into the world. There can be childhood fears of attacks and childhood repression of one's initiative or capability to take one's initiative. That can also lead to pathological dependence and being a parasite. There can be childhood memories of intense defeat, pain, humiliation, attack when one tried to be independent, when one tried to be good. It can also be a predominantly antisocial environment in which one grows up. It is a moral question in one sense. If the morality of the childhood environment is completely distorted, it can easily lead to a creation of a psychological parasite. It can also be a defective superego. We can also be dealing with a superego pathology. That a defective superego, because of failure of internalization of the ideal figures, the inability to pass through the Oedipal phase, the inability to experience guilt completely. So all of this, we can also add to this the fear of disintegration anxiety, the fear of activation of the Oedipus, the fear of activation of the split, the disintegration of the fragile self. All of this in different ways can lead to a position, rather a situation where one takes the position of a psychological parasite. How does psychoanalysis proceed in terms of healing? Variety of ways. Based upon what is the pathology, you take the root corresponding to that pathology. In many cases, it has to do with superego development, consolidation and integration of the superego. In some cases, it has to do with building up, I am good enough, so one can go out into the world and not be a psychological parasite on anyone, either financially or psychologically. Owning up one's projective identifications as they happen in therapy, that can save oneself from being a subtle psychological parasite. Owning up of inertia addiction and working upon it. Allowing the reduction in pleasure which can happen by giving up the state of reverie and doing nothing and moving out into the world for oneself and being independent. It is difficult work because you have to sacrifice pleasure for development of ethics and superego. If the pleasure can't be sacrificed, it's difficult to heal. Occasionally, reality also can heal if there are no choice and you receive 10 kicks because you be a psychological parasite. So those kicks then reform you. It's a kind of a intense behavioral therapy which reality gives you. In the long run, in most cases of parasites, they get the kick. If not early, then definitely in the middle age or old age. The point is, do they get those kicks at an age which is correct, or rather which is potent for change to happen? Earlier the better. Often it can happen at a mature age where there is no going back, there is no turning the clock back. And even if one changes oneself, the life is lost already. Usually what happens in practice? One, there is a disowning of this part of oneself or this fact of oneself that one is a psychological parasite. One disowns it by saying there is a part of me which makes me do it. In a way, it is correct. In a way, it's a disowning. Usually, the realization of being a psychological parasite comes too late. Life has already been lost by then. Often, secretly, a revenge is taken. And if the revenge is taken from the right person, in some way, you still have a half justification. But if the revenge is taken in displacement, it is then an unforgivable sin situation. And most victims unfortunately end up in psychotherapy and not the parasites themselves. Very few of the psychological parasites usually come for psychotherapy. It's the victims who come. Psychological parasites, those who come are those who are thrown into a helpless situations and can't continue successfully the parasite stance that they have taken for so long. A very important element of this healing process is a slow and gradual experiencing of a non-parasitic relationship, which is completely new for someone who has been a psychological parasite for a long time. He has a problem of giving and a pathological problem of receiving. Some, however, do work through and set themselves free. Is there a socio-economic aspect to this? Yes. In some situations, because of socio-economic situations, there would be no option for a person but to be a parasite. The helplessness just gets you trained into it. Circumstances just get you trained into it. More true, this is in underdeveloped societies, in low income levels, and for women and helpless children, orphan children, or children not cared by the parents. A large part of it is also how parents train children. It can also be elderly who are completely dependent or the sick who are completely dependent. They also over time get trained into this position of a psychological parasite unknowingly. They don't realize when they have crossed the line. Many of those who are psychological parasites become so because they find themselves helpless in a harsh world, incompetent in this demanding capitalist order. They stand helpless, incompetent, disoriented, unclear, in the middle of a world that's rushing ahead, that is technologically so complicated, that is so hierarchical, so technologized, and almost heartless. It's very important to realize this. It's often missed. I was listening to a video by Jordan Peterson, I believe, and he mentioned about the US Army, that they are always hungry for people. They find it difficult to recruit in adequate quantity and quality. And they have been doing IQ tests for a long time, and they have realized if the IQ is below 82, it's very difficult to train them into even the least complicated of tasks in the army. And this they found is almost 10% of human population. And we are talking about one of the most developed societies. If you go to less developed societies, more poor societies, societies gravely exploited by colonial imperialists, in those societies, this number can easily be 15 to 20%. 15% is more likely, where 15% of population just can't fit into the world with its complexity and its competitiveness as it is. And add to it the problems of privilege, the problems of unfairness, the problems of lack of mentorship, support, and resources. And you have this quite a big group of people in society, especially in the less developed world, where it's very easy to develop some antisocial traits or to develop some traits which put you into position of a psychological parasite. And then there are malevolent parasites who just have more of psychopathy and more of antisocial elements. Is there a take of spirituality on this? There are many things spirituality says about it. One thing it says is about karma settling, that it's not always a new act starting off afresh, but often it can be settling of karma. It can also be karmic compulsion, that you have been so before and you start doing it again. And of course, it adds to your karma, makes it more difficult in evolution. In rare cases, it may be a part of self journey, that somebody has experienced independence for quite some incarnations and now wants to experience dependence. It can be a superego challenge, which in the spiritual journey one has to develop. That the spiritual journey demands that you develop spiritual ego, freedom from dependencies, freedom from people. And this may be the very spiritual journey you are supposed to undertake. And the state of the pathological state of psychological, being a psychological parasite, is a starting point from where you have to start your spiritual journey. And your goals, your intermediate challenges, your path is such that the intermediate challenges include earning freedom from dependency, people, and giving up possessions. Spirituality brings in this element of giving up. And this has a direct relation with psychological parasites, where they know how to receive, but they don't know how to give. And giving up, these two are encouraged by spirituality. Spirituality also talks about freedom from negative effects, and as a generic principle that includes all pathologies, including this one. It talks about giving, not taking. And spirituality emphasizes on selflessness, which is completely opposite to being a parasite. So spirituality has quite some things to say. It also has many techniques to offer on when it engages with, when spirituality engages with this entity of psychological parasites. There's quite an amount of conceptual literature, a basket full of techniques, how to get out of it, and goals which one has to realize. Spirituality, therefore, can be very synergetically combined with psychotherapy in the healing process. Of course, the client and the therapist both being oriented to holistic healing, conditional to it. Thank you.